Hey everybody, what is going on? This is Scott Garber back in the saddle of the Profluence Sports Podcast, where we are highlighting founders, investors, executives across the sports business landscape. Today, I'm excited to bring on our next guest, bringing in a industry report from McKinsey Consulting, two of their partners, Ben Von Willer and Alberto Chaia. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. How are we doing today?
Awesome. Great to be with you, Scott.
Excited to have you guys. And, for all of you listeners, sometimes we get so far in the weeds on what's going on in the industry. Today, we're going to get to talk about what's going on around the industry, and couldn't think of two better guests to help us not only navigate what's going on here in the domestic U.S. sporting market, but really put a spotlight on the LATAM markets as well as they continue to grow, flourish from youth to pro, and then all the fan engagement and buying behaviors around it. Gentlemen, as we always do, it's important to understand your guys' origin story and sort of what led up to you guys developing these reports. So Alberto, starting with you, give the listeners a little context on your journey, and then Ben will pass the mic over.
Thank you, Scott. So I was born in Mexico. My parents are Lebanese immigrants to Mexico. And one of the most important things for us growing up was sports. Like literally my first memory is my dad teaching me the Yankees lineup. I don't know why. He was born in a very small central town in Mexico, and he developed a passion for baseball, and he wanted to pass that to me. And most of my early memories revolved around sports, playing soccer, playing basketball, playing baseball, being a huge fan of Cruz Azul in Mexico, of the Yankees, of the Denver Broncos. I can tell you later why I became a Broncos fan. Sports has been a really important part of my development. I'm also an economist. I'm an economist by training. I did a PhD at Columbia, and I joined McKinsey partly because it allowed me to do this type of research, this type of really interesting topics around the intersection of economics and different industries. And this year we did this report around sports and how sports are important for community building, how sports are an engine of growth of the economy, and probably more important for us Latinos, how sports and family intersect. So those things are quite important to me.
Very cool. No, and I think it's really interesting to get that perspective of a sport enthusiast with economist background. As the asset class continues to grow and everything sort of seems to be funneling down into sports, excited to unpack some of the findings, through the report. Now, Ben, I know sports is more at the bullseye or center of the target for you there. Give the listeners a little context on your journey into McKinsey.
So I'm Australian. I grew up just north of Sydney. Sport is a religion there, so I've been deeply engaged with sports my whole life. And then professionally, I've been in New York City over 20 years, and I lead the global sports and gaming practice at McKinsey. So sports is now very much core to what I do day to day. So I work with all kinds of clients throughout that ecosystem. So a lot of rights holders, so teams, leagues, governing bodies, events, but then every adjacent market around that IP. So sports media, sports betting, sports tech and data, real estate in sports, private equity investing in sports, public sector clients, everything from ministries of sport through to youth sports, and then all of the commerce and services that's selling.
Super interesting. And Ben, I'm sure you'll nod your head to this, but, we've seen more change and iteration to the domestic sporting landscape in the last 5 years than maybe the last 100 years combined. So, I think we can take this conversation in so many different directions. One way to maybe kick off the conversation, the research that you guys were doing, called the Latino fan, the blueprint for the next era of American sport fandom. From your vantage point, what does that actually mean for leagues, teams, brands, youth sports participation? Really curious. I think that's a great foundation for us to sort of build the conversation from. Curious, Ben, going to come up to you to kick this off. What does that mean through your lens?
So we were really interested to take a look at the Hispanic segment in the US in particular, largely because it's such a fast-growing population. And when we dug in here, the sports market in the US, about 160 billion, is going to double. And Latinos or Hispanics make up about 19% of the sports fan population today. They're going to drive a third of the growth over the next 10 years. So they have a disproportionate significance in terms of all of the money that's going to drive the sports ecosystem over time. So that's sort of the first thing that struck me as we were looking at this, and that's relevant for every stakeholder, not just rights holders. Secondly, it's a population that is not perfectly understood. So we spoke to about 60 different stakeholders across the industry, mostly teams, but also federations, governing bodies, broadcasters. A lot of the people at the coalface in sports, everybody would prioritize this segment as a group that's very important for them on a go-forward basis. Less than half would say they really understand them and have really kind of cracked the code how to engage them. So really, really important in terms of its influence, imperfectly understood. And then sort of the final thing that struck me as we did this work is the picture that emerges of the sort of Hispanic sports fan is a really interesting portrait of a potential sort of fan of the future. And by that, I mean, we worry a lot in sports about changing behaviors, including people who watch less live sports and spend maybe less in various parts of their sports fandom. Hispanic sports fans spend a lot more than other fans, which is what's driving that outsized impact on growth. It's not just population growth. It's actually far more that they spend, more than the average fan. And then they're very engaged in digital channels. And that's a really interesting vein for us to explore. They're more willing to subscribe to sports streaming services. They're more willing to engage with sports content on social platforms. And so I think there's a very interesting lens on how we both engage this population, but then an encouraging picture of the future of fandom as we look at them.
It's super interesting. And I mean, look, I was blown away when you talk about 1/3 of all of the sports industry will, be made up of Latino fans. I'm curious, Alberto, through your lens, when you come in from an economist lens here, right? What are some of the things that the sporting industry is underestimating when they look at, this demographic and the way that we're looking to grow and evolve and fold them into the sporting ecosystem? I'm curious, what were some of the findings there that, you saw as underestimated, where we could lean in and improve or take advantage of?
Yeah. So let me start with that demographic point, Scott. Latinos are already 20% of the US population, and it's projected to grow to 1/3 of the population in the next 15 years. So that's massive by itself, right? How quickly the population is growing. It's a younger population in general than other groups in the US, and one that is spending significantly more in sports than any other. So Latinos spend 15% more than any other group in sports. And if you adjust that by income, typically it's a lower income population, it's 50% more. So your average Latino fan spends 50% more than your non-Latino fan in sports. That's a lot, right? Like, that's already a lot. And it's not only big in terms of how much they're spending, but also in how much time they're spending in front of the TV, how much time they're willing to travel to go to a live event, how loyal they are to the teams. So all of that, when you compound all of that, that explains why they're driving that big of a percentage of the growth. And the growth, again, is not insignificant. Ben was describing the sports economy is going to double in the next 10 years. That's another $150 billion that are going to be added to the economy. More than a third is going to come from Latinos. When we're talking to these teams, leagues, organizations, what I was more struck by was that I could not find a single one that said Latinos are not important. Everybody understands that Latinos are important, but I could not find many that had a real strategy to engage with Latinos, right? Like, it was hard to really find a well-structured way for teams and leagues to interact with Latinos. Everybody recognizes that the numbers are staggering, as we were describing, but not everybody understands how to engage with them. Part of it has to do with the fact that Latinos are not a monolith, right? Like, when you say Latino, it's very different to say Mexican than to say Puerto Rican, right?
Alberto, growing up in South Florida, I learned that lesson the hard way, but you are spot on there.
I'm sure you did, right? It's different. Mexicans love American football. Well, Mexicans love football, right? When you go and talk to a Colombian about football, they might not understand what you're talking about. And I think it's important to understand that as teams are trying to target this population. There are few teams that are doing this really well. The Dodgers, for example, they have a great engagement with the Mexican American community in LA. The Broncos have actually a fantastic way to engage with Mexicans. So all of that is good, but there are very few examples of teams actually doing this right. And I think they're going to take advantage of the fact that the economy is going to grow so much and Latinos are such an important part. This needs to change. And there are ways to do it. Let me stop there and keep the conversation flowing, Scott.
No, this is, and it's super interesting, right? And I think that when we look at sports, like similar to Latinas, we can't, like, sports are not just like one blanket, this is how we define them, right? There's different categories that make up, youth sports, the, sort of transition periods that we'll look here domestically in the collegiate markets. There's private, there's public. And then we have the, the professional ecosystems, the challenger leagues, and then all this, sort of tertiary or fandom that exists around it. So I'm curious, as you guys started to do these industry reports, we watch big commercial brands like NASCAR bring their street series over, F1 in Mexico, the NFL moving over. Talk more on the youth sports side, right? One of the biggest through lines as we continue to commercialize the asset class is how do we continue to drive participation, educate folks about the power of sport, and then ultimately create that lifelong fan. Would be really curious your guys' findings around the youth sports side as you guys develop this report.
Yeah. Let me start with some numbers, and I'm sure that Ben can complement on the trends. Youth sports represent around 15% of today's sports ecosystem. It's growing fast. It's growing around 4% per year between 2019 and 2024. Around 54% of Latinos are active in sports right now. That's almost the same as non-Latinos. Non-Latinos is around 56%. So there's not a big gap in terms of getting into sports. What we're saying, Scott, that I think is concerning, but also a big opportunity here, is that Latino kids actually abandon sports faster than non-Latino kids. When you get to 13, 14, which is when all the travel leagues, the challenger teams, everything that you were describing starts, this is when Latino kids start dropping out much faster than any other group, right? Like when you have to buy that $300 baseball bat, right? When you have to make sure that you take your kid every Saturday and Sunday to a soccer match, that's when Latinos start dropping faster than other groups. And that's something that we were highlighting in the report. We're not coming up with specific solutions for that, but we're saying that this is something that needs to be addressed. I don't know, Ben, you have more.
So youth sports is really important. It's like it is obviously important if you are a rights holder and you're trying to create fans, that it is one of the most well tried and true pathways to fandom. It's also really important from a sort of health and life outcomes point of view, which shouldn't be overlooked here. Alberto is right that Hispanic families face a lot of challenges when it comes to participating in youth sports. Some of them are probably intuitive. So cost is consistently a challenge. And we've seen, I'm sure you know this, Scott, the costs of participation in youth sports in the US in particular are growing incredibly fast. There is a sort of indirect or hidden cost that is a big deal for Hispanic and other maybe less economically well-off communities, which is travel and time. That even if you can afford the cost, you also need time, or to pay someone to take your kid to and from all of the trainings, games, and tournaments, and that's challenging if you don't have that time. And then the other insight we've seen to Hispanic but also African American participation, when you ask people why they stop playing, they'll tell you, I'm focusing on a different sport, or I need to focus on academics, or I don't have time. But when you do what we call the derived analytics and look at other comments they've made about their youth sports experience, and then see what those responses, how well those responses explain the decision to leave. What is striking with Hispanic and also African American kids is they're leaving because it wasn't fun or they didn't feel included. And I think this is a very challenging insight for folks running these programs, because you can't rely on just on sort of structural life changes to explain attrition here. It means it's addressable, but it means you've got to make some changes as to the way you're running your programs to make these kids feel welcome and ensure they have fun, and that you can actually get them staying in the sport for longer.
It's super interesting. And I'm curious, Ben, I'm going to stay with you for a second, right? When we talk to, teams and leagues and right holders, they understand the importance of developing and nurturing the youth, not just from 6 to 13, but 13 to 18, and really, sort of that long tail that comes after it. As you're presenting some of these findings, are you seeing the teams try to lean in with more aggressive strategies to leverage their platforms to help develop and nurture both the athlete and the fandom? Or where is the responsibility lying in the current state of the ecosystem today?
So I think the short answer is we are seeing that. So it is, I think, unquestionably true that leagues and teams are starting to lean hard into youth sports, and some of them may even privately say, we fell asleep at the wheel in the past and sort of didn't pay enough attention here. Interestingly, when we're doing this specific work around Hispanic sports fandom and how teams in particular were looking to engage with the Hispanic community in their specific areas, many of the ones that said they were successful were allocating meaningful resources to youth sports across multiple sort of spend categories. Grants for equipment so that there were programs for kids to play, infrastructure, so hockey in particular is looking at building out ice rinks so that there is a place for people to play. And then they're doing that in a way that's quite integrated with the local community. So the partnership is a chance for success. And I think even places like the NFL, part of their interest in flag football is finding a way that makes it easier for people, especially in kind of non-heartland areas, domestically and internationally, to engage and pick up the sport. And if you do.
Very interesting. No, this is really interesting stuff, guys. And I think that these are challenges that as the asset class continues to grow and scale, it's important to put the spotlight on this, to be able to go ahead and look at them as opportunities. Alberto, I love the framing of that, right? What seemingly are challenges create opportunities for us to go ahead and continue to iterate. Curious, I'm going to, touch on a real world event that's going on here. Alberto, we have the World Cup coming to North America again, right? And so with your economist hat on, how do we highlight some of these opportunities and lean into the global spotlight being on North America and lean in to raise awareness, but also accelerate some of these opportunities to change, grow, evolve? Curious your thoughts there.
Yeah. Let me just make one last point on the importance of youth, and then I'll go to the World Cup, Scott. We also did a survey with a panel of Latino corporate directors. So those are the people who sit on public boards and all of that. You can argue that are some of the most influential and successful people from the Latino community. So we asked them, how many of you play sports, organize sports as you were growing up?
Wow.
87% of them play some sort of sport. So this is why we think it's so important that we address the issue that we were discussing. Why it's important to keep kids playing longer than 13 in league. So they get the benefits of sports, the benefits of being part of teams, the benefits of the discipline that sports bring, all of that, because it helps you later in life.
And Alberto, real quick before we go, I think this is such an important lane to stay on. And as we continue to move into a world that is more automated, as we watch AI continue to come in and replace some of the mundane human tasks, sports is not only this ecosystem where we get to develop as humans, right? The soft skills, all the things around it, but it becomes this melting pot of a community, right? And I think what's so neat, whether it's the Denver Broncos or a Crystal Palace jersey, when you wear something, it's a community that's bigger than you and pulls all race, colors, creeds. It's truly a globalization event, right? And so I think it's neat to highlight the LATAM market here, but it's also a way to bring us together and elevate all humans, right? And so I think as we continue to go down this path, into what the future will look like, there's a lot of exciting things, but we're still human at our core, and sports will continue to be this binding agent, which, I'd be remiss, I wouldn't be here without sports, right? So I'd be remiss without.
Yeah, neither would I. And I think one of the questions my clients ask me the most often, Scott, is what's going to happen with AI and jobs, right? Is AI are going to take over all the jobs? My answer is I don't know. But what I do know is that we will require to adapt to this new world, right? And sports give you that. So sports require adaptability. Sports require you to come up with a new play, to come up with a new way, change the tactics that your opposing team is putting in front of you, and we need that, right? That's what it's going to be needed in the future, and again, this is an added benefit. I think that belonging to something, as you were saying, and making sure that that you get the benefits from participating in sports is crucial for success later in life, and probably now is more crucial than ever given all of the changes that we're seeing on the Latin
Absolutely.
market. I could not agree with you more, right? Like, I think that, I mean, you know this well. Mexico City is probably by far the largest market that the NFL doesn't have a team in, right?
Yep.
Like, by far. It's something that is not only not shrinking, but is growing significantly. And you see more and more every time. I remember going to, we're talking a lot about the Broncos, but I'm a fan, as I
Yeah.
told you before.
I lived in Denver for 7 years, so I am an honorary fan of the Mile High.
I have a house in Colorado. I love Colorado.
Yeah.
But I remember going, I've been to many, many football games, but I cannot forget, sorry, my first Broncos game in Mexico City at the Aztec Stadium, 115,000 people in that stadium watching the Broncos, completely surreal experience, right? And it happens every time we have an NFL game. So it is growing fast. Same with the NBA. I mean, with the G League in Mexico City, you see the excitement, you see the business case for investing more in those markets. So it is it is not only about producing players to come to the US, but it's a big market by itself.
Alberto, let me ask you this, and I think this is sometimes like we live within our sort of horse blinders here. You know, we spend a ton of time focusing on what's going on in North America and the expansion of leagues. Talk to us about what's going on in Mexico City and other LATAM countries. Where are we watching new leagues develop? What does the pipeline development of athlete participation look like there outside of, the US and some of our, enterprise properties being a catalyst there?
Yeah, you're seeing dramatic change. I think what you're seeing, for example, with the Mexican Soccer League now being very integrated with the US Soccer League, which is not something that I would have expected growing up in Mexico. We always saw a huge separation between the Mexican and the US League, and now they are converging, right? And
Mm.
I would not be surprised to see an integrated league in the future at some point, right? Like you see more and more international games, you see more and more real development youth leagues in Mexico City that are very similar to the US leagues that we did not have before. You see like high quality baseball academies popping up all around the next. I talk more about Mexico because that's a market I know well, but you can see
Absolutely.
those in the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico and a couple of other places. You're seeing going from something that was more a passion of playing sports and making sure that you're participating to something that is significantly more professional. Clearly, the Mexican Soccer League is one of the most productive in the world and probably one of the best paid leagues in the world. So that helps in making sure that you can get these long-term development programs. But you're seeing a level of development that is much more similar to the US than what we used to have. And this has only increased over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, it's super exciting, right? And I think we're going to only watch that acceleration. And, at least the hypothesis will be that one will fuel each other, right? Like one will fuel the other, and together, all boats will rise in the harbor. Ben, not only are you a partner at McKinsey, you're also a magician. You went away and came back. It's nice to have you, my friend. I am going to hop right back in. So you're in the hot seat again. And, we're talking about commercial properties, both in North America, in LATAM. One of the things that stood out to me in the report was around the digital fluency, right? And I want to really focus on, sort of your engagement with these right holders, with the leagues and teams. It's so much of the conversation is how are we going to go ahead and start to go and engage with younger fans, millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and younger. We see the LATAM market through your guys' report, over-indexing on TikTok, Instagram, non-linear consumption methods. As you're working with these commercial groups, Ben, talk to us. Are they adopting their strategy and leaning into the LATAM consumer to help grow this? What have been some of the findings and that you've had coming out of this report?
So I think a couple of observations. You are 100% right that the Hispanic fans are very active and wanting to engage on digital platforms. They, as I mentioned earlier, over-index on a paid basis, so subscribing to sports streaming services, whether that's ESPN Plus or others. So that's very encouraging for rights holders. I think where less attention historically has been devoted, but you're starting to see people really lean into it, is short form social media engagement. Obviously, rights holders are present on these platforms, maybe not to their full potential, but they're certainly present. But they aren't necessarily present consistently with content that is targeted at engaging the Hispanic fan base on these communities, on these platforms in particular. And that, I think, remains a big opportunity that awareness is growing around. So we spoke earlier around sort of Hispanics not being a monolith. There is absolutely different, both kind of country of origin communities and then also different generations of Hispanic fans. So whether you're a first generation through to a third generation present in the US. And those things drive differences in terms of tastes and consumption and content creation. And I think that's the big challenge that people are still starting to wrestle with, getting enough resources against this opportunity so you can create tailored, engaging content on these platforms, both directly yourself. And then I think the people who are most advanced at this are also are working with influencers and others so that you're doing collabs and partnerships that's bringing kind of your content in an authentic way to these kind of sub-communities.
You hit the nail on the head with the word authenticity. And I think that to me has been one of the areas of opportunity for growth. It's we know we need to penetrate these markets. We understand the commercial upside and what it will do for us holistically as a society and a community. It's incredibly challenging to buy culture, right? And, not just the LATAM market. I think this is humans as a whole, where it's like, if you are just buying your way into this, we'll sniff it out. And it almost has a reverse effect as to showing up authentically and building this from the ground up. And so I'm curious, are there any groups that stick out, or are there any sports that you guys are able to talk about that are taking this strategy and implementing it in a way that you think is more correct for a long-term sustainable engagement? I'm curious if any stick out to either of you guys.
So the first thing I'd say is this authenticity point is real. And actually, when we surveyed Hispanic sports fans, this was one area where they said, hey, we are not satisfied. Like, we don't think we are consistently being engaged with in a way that's culturally relevant for us. So it's a big opportunity, and they're telling us it's a big opportunity. And they're saying, were you to do that, I would engage more deeply. It would actually have a very positive effect on my engagement with you. There are, I think, people who are starting to do this well. There is a Major League Baseball team in California that has, I think, really invested in building out its marketing capability for Hispanic fans. They have deliberately tried to target representation within their front office, so they have people working for their organization from different countries of origin. So that lets them test the authenticity, and then they tailor their marketing and engagement campaigns by both country of origin and by generation. And I think that they've seen success, and I think it's not a pure correlation. And when you look ahead to the kind of technology that's coming with Gen AI, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do this at scale much more productively as the kind of cost of creating content and versioning that content comes down. And I think that is an exciting kind of future development for folks looking to make progress here.
I think that's such an exciting lens to look at it through. Alberto, please piggyback.
Yeah, I was going to give you another example. So we're talking to Inter Miami. Obviously, Leo Messi changed everything, But when Inter started, even though the name of the team is in Spanish, the football Inter Miami, so it was interesting that they decided to go that way. They always thought that they didn't want it to be seen as a token Hispanic team. So their announcement at the stadium was in English, like all their social media was in English. Messi came, they started engaging in Spanish with fans, and the engagement went through the roof. Obviously, we cannot discard the effect that Messi had on this, but when you talk to them, they discovered that they were doing this wrong. They started doing announcements both in English and Spanish in the stadium. People were more excited when they were doing that. They created specific Instagram accounts in Spanish. People all around the world started engaging with them. I mean, the Inter Miami story by itself is crazy, right? Like I would have
Absolutely.
never bet any amount of money that I would see an American soccer team jersey as you're walking down the streets in Europe, right? And I've seen them, like literally the blue green jersey that came out last year. I saw it one day after it was launched in the streets of Barcelona. Imagine how crazy that is. Like that
Yeah.
is a success story. But the way that they have engaged with the community is also one of the ones that other teams should be looking at. They are creating specific ways to engage with the Colombian community here in Miami. They're creating specific ways to really engage the Latino fan who sometimes prefer to speak Spanish and sometimes they don't, right? It's a delicate balance, but you need to find a way to do it right. And they're doing a great job at that.
Yeah, no, I think it's two great examples, and it goes far beyond just the product that you're putting on social and the product you're putting on the pitch. It has everything to do with the whole experience surrounding it, right? So, showing up and eating cheeseburgers at a match, or am I eating a tamale, right? Like, I mean, it's very much, it's how do we take all of the things that bring community together that now says this is an extension of our culture, and it's expressed through sport. And I think sometimes we lose that as we start to just focus on the almighty dollar instead of the roots of what, sport has the ability to do. Guys, I have two more questions as we start to round this thing out. A lot of the conversation today have been around male-dominated leagues. There's a rise in women's sports here in the U.S. and around the world, both from participation and from commercialization. Can you speak to any findings that touch into the women market and what that looks like, in the LATAM space?
Not only let me start with girls. Participation of Latino girls rose from 39% to 48% over the last 5 years. Fastest growth that you can say of any group that we have been testing. So clearly, something is going right in the way that they're participating. Same issues as we were describing in general. Once they reach 13, 14, it's going down. Yesterday was the final of the Mexican Soccer League. I was watching the game. I was very impressed, right? You had players from all around the world now playing in a women's soccer league in Mexico. I never thought this was going to happen, right? You have the captain of the Spanish team who won the World Cup 2 years ago playing for a Mexican team from the north of Mexico. Crazy. So you're seeing a significant rise of those leagues, not only in the US, but all across the region. Maybe other countries are slower to catch up, but you're seeing something similar in Brazil, obviously, in terms of soccer, but you're also seeing that in flag football. You remember the NFL ad last year with the Mexican quarterback. She's fantastic. I know her, by the way. She I also serve universities, and she plays for the university team that I work with, and she's amazing. And you're seeing more and more of those examples. I don't think that those are token examples. You're seeing a movement towards girls' participation in sports all across the country.
Alberto, nice little plug there. Ben, anything to add on top of that?
So you're 100% right. Women's sports is past an inflection point and is definitely taking off. And you're seeing that in terms of fandom broadly. We've done separate work on this topic. 80% of US sports fans, or just under, identify as women's sports fans, which is insane. Like, just such a broadly penetrated mainstream set of fans now. Most of those fans are new. So 60% of them have started following women's sports in the last 5 years. A third of them have started following women's sports in the last 2 years. So very early in terms of their adoption. I think we don't have, it wasn't a focus of the Hispanic sports fan research we did. I think there's probably some work to be done on the Hispanic fandom side, at least for the WNBA. I think they're a little behind. In terms of sort of fair share penetration of sort of 19% of the population. I think they're a little under. I don't think I have, off the top of my head, I don't know the NWSL. Maybe they're doing better because of the sort of generally Hispanic fans over-index in soccer and baseball. So NWSL may be a different story.
Interesting. Super cool and insightful. Ben, I feel like there's a ton of conversations we could have that come as, sort of tentacles off of this and some of the extensive research that you, Alberto, and the rest of the team have done. Guys, I'm really curious. This will probably bring us home, but at Profluence, with our member base, we're seeing a ton of new leagues start to pop up, both challenger leagues to existing, but also starting to commercialize everything from cliff diving to disc golf to robot fighting and everything in between. If you guys were able to take one piece of advice from your guys' studies that you would give somebody building a new league to try and help build fandom in the Latino market, what would that be and why?
So I can start. So there is a absolute mushrooming of new leagues. I think, the number of new league starts in the last 5 years is 2x those in the 5 years before it. So it's really a lot of effort and resources are going here. Most of them are attacking in some way, which means that they're typically going to be leaning towards broad, digital distribution of their content. Guess where Hispanics are consuming sports content? Digital. So there's a sort of, you have the benefit of being on the right platforms. The trend that we see that intersects at least a portion of these new leagues is what we're starting to call competitive entertainment. So it's you're taking some of the hallmarks of traditional sports, but then you're integrating them with other hallmarks of more entertainment factors. So that's a very broad category. It's everything from esports to beast games to kind of new non-traditional leagues like Kings League and Baller League. One of I think the lessons learned for what makes these successful is the integration of personalities and entertainment. So if you're going after a Hispanic fan base and getting them to engage, finding the right talent and personalities to integrate in an appropriate and authentic way with your property is likely to lead to higher engagement with these communities. So there's two quick thoughts.
Yeah.
Ben, I love it. Alberto, please piggyback.
I would add, I think you mentioned authenticity before, Scott. I think if your idea of engaging with Latino fans is to do a mariachi night or a tamale night, that's not going to work, right? Clearly, that's what most of the teams are doing. And if you're creating a new league and you're trying to engage Latinos, look at what happened with paddle, right? It's incredible what has happened and how many Latinos love playing that sport. There was nothing, I would say, very unique about the sports that tennis or other sports do not bring. It's just that it grew within the community. People start creating content also in Spanish. It doesn't hurt that the best players in the world are from Argentina and Spain, but I mean, the rise of paddle in the Latino community is something that should be a blueprint for any new league that wants to engage with fans to see how they're doing, why building courts closer to Latino communities can yield to the results that they're seeing today.
Alberto, it's a great call out, right? And I think Padel is one of those that encompasses everything. Still, curious to see what the commercial upside looks like, but the community elements, the grassroots, and then all the modalities around it really bring that community together, and it shows up in a very authentic way, which ultimately I think is, as we zoom out of this conversation, sports is just that binding agent, right? And, I don't think there's a better time to be building in sports as long as we're willing to step out of our comfort zone, surrender the ego and actually give a product that's authentic to people that want to consume it. I believe that there's enough space for us to continue to grow, evolve, expand. And it seems sort of limitless at this point. Gentlemen, this has been an absolute treat. I love sitting in this seat because I get to learn, and it feels like we just scratched the surface. I'm going to give both of you the last word to take us home. Alberto, any parting words for our listeners about what has you excited as we go into 26, sort of piggybacking this results?
I mean, we're living in a very unique moment in sports, Scott. World Cup is coming next year. The Olympics 2 years after that. I think that places like LA, Dallas, Miami, where a lot of those games and where the Latino community are going to happen, are going to experience a once in a generation boost, and we need to take advantage of that, right? The fact that though all of those people from all around the world are going to be coming to the US, are going to be looking at what our great cities have to offer, is something that we need to take advantage of. It will also create significant fandom in the future. Really appreciate the time. This was fantastic.
All right, Ben, bring us home. You got big shoes to
So
fill.
my final thought, we're seeing meaningful shifts in fan behavior, especially from younger fans, and Hispanics over-index young. My final thought is there'll be some who sleep on this and are kind of stuck in the ways they've traditionally engaged what was historically the majority of their fan base, and they'll get left behind, and there'll be others who recognize the shifts and put resources against engaging those fans in new and different ways, and they'll succeed.
Listen, the train has left the station. It's time to hop on and vamonos. Gentlemen, thank you so much for everything you're doing for the sporting industry. Look forward to many more conversations in the future. We'll do it again soon.
Thank you, Scott.